So tonight, I have three voices that are going to join me in doing justice to the president's first State of the Nation address. First, I have Alfred Appiah, who is a data scientist and policy analyst. I have Oreku Kusi Ampofo, who is a policy analyst based in Canada. And then Conrad Dumba. He is the chairman of the NDC Ireland UK chapter and also a vice president with Citibank. So, gentlemen, you're welcome.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much, Doc.
So, all right. Yeah. So I want to begin with the appointments so far. Right. There's an adage that says personnel is policy. Right. So with the appointments so far, do they signal an effort towards the reset agenda? And I would like to begin with Conrad, who is a member of the NDC.
I can't seem
Okay.
to hear you.
Can you hear me? All right. Conrad is frozen. Let me go to Oreku first with this. I mean, usually, yeah, personnel is policy. If you set an agenda, it means, especially with respect to, delivering a vision that you promise the Ghanaian people, it has to reflect in the people that you have appointed. Does the current appointments that you have seen so far signal that the agenda is going to be achieved?
Good afternoon.
Yes.
It's afternoon in Alberta. So good afternoon to yourself. Good afternoon to my colleague panelists and your cherished viewers and listeners. So this is a big question. Like I agree with you, personnel is policy. So far, all the people that the president have appointed are qualified regardless of how you look at it. They are qualified to be in that position. They deserve to be in that position, and the president want them to be in that position. Then there is an issue of whether they can deliver or not. And for me, the promises of resetting the country and what the president talked about in terms of a broken country can only be fixed when we allow sober minds, not necessarily the political football that we've always been playing. We allow system structural changes when we decide to really look at ourselves in the mirror and say, this is the type of country we want to build, and this is what we are going to do to deliver that. So it's beyond individual minister here or there, because in my mind, systems co-evolve. So when you have one system doing well and the other not doing well, it will affect the other. So for me, so far so good. I don't have any issue with any of the appointees. I mean, one can make a case that this should have been a finance minister, this should have been, but at the end of the day, whoever qualifies to be there, the president appointed that person to be there. It's not up to us to really dictate to the president who he should appoint, because the appointment into political office actually comes with a lot of things. Some of them constitutional. Some of them, the Constitution is talking about regional balance. The Constitution is talking about 50% plus must come from Parliament. So all those things, you have to factor it in your appointment. But for me, what I'm really a little bit not optimistic with a reset agenda is the fact that we seems to be towing the same line of political response. and how, when governments take over, the way we behave. So Operation Recover or Loot is an example. Right now, I haven't really seen any concrete program or agenda to stop or to prevent what they are accusing their political opponents of.
Okay. So I think you're getting ahead of us. I want
right.
us to, concentrate on the appointments first, and then we'll come to the specific issues that were mentioned by the president. And oral will be one of those issues.
Okay. Then so
right?
far, I don't have any issue with the president.
So, but if
I
you
don't
were
want to go into
advising
the
somebody who,
details.
yeah, but if you were advising somebody who is interested in politics and an ambitious and is ambitious to become sort of a successful politician in the future, observing from the appointments, how would you advise a person to navigate?
Oh, that's the realm of politics. I mean, we
Okay.
see a pattern. We see a pattern where those who are loud, those who are really media, who have media presence, are more successful in the appointment. So
Okay.
I was listening to your MP Adongo, and
Mhm.
so far his name hasn't come up, and I think some group came out to do some press conference for him, and he's asking them to calm down because his name will one day be mentioned, even if it's not now. His time will come. So we see that those who are in the media, those who are making a lot of noise, and those who showcase their competence openly in the media. So media really has become a tool where you can showcase your competence if you really want to be successful. If you look at the pattern, if you look at the people that have also been appointed CEOs, some of them, they've been given the position because they represent a certain political constituency. And I think the president wants to hold those constituency still to his chest. So he gave key SOE positions to politically people who think and breathe politics, like Semi Jamfi. Everybody was expecting him to either be a deputy minister or a full minister, but he went to the CEO route, which was shocking. And such a political guy, if you give him the position, you have to be careful because he can use the post for further pure partisan calculations, which there's nothing wrong with that, but it's normally going to happen when I think the youth coordinator. What is this guy? I like him. He's one of those. He was
Basantali.
When he was going to
Basantali.
his office, if you look at the numbers that followed him, I said, "Oh boy, it's going to be difficult for this guy to succeed because the expectation and how the number of people that will want something." And let us not forget, in our part of the world, when people campaign for you to come, they are not really looking for the overall picture of the things. They want direct material benefit. And that is why Apia Stadium, who is also one guy I like, and Mahama should listen to him and give him some appointment. He himself is going around saying that he also wants something. He also wants some appointment. So the expectation of appointment has been very high in our country now, because people are seeing some people just showing up in the media and getting some juicy deals. And because of that, it has really brought a lot of pressure on the president. But I'm hoping the president will not allow the pressure to be too much. Will do what is right to reset the country. And if he's able to do that, it's good for his legacy, it's good for Ghana, and it's good for his party. Because NDC's success in the next 4 years will be dependent on the reset agenda. Whether he's going to use the left key or the right key will be determined by that.
All right. So, Conrad, we lost you in the first moment. So, if you could come in now.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope my line is clear now.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I think that for me, so far, so good. Today is the 1st of March. We are approximately 50 days in government. And I think the appointments that have been made so far, like my good brother Oraku said, there's no one that has been appointed that we have concerns over their competence. A lot of the concerns you see are around why Asumisi is not there and so forth is not there. But we are confident that gradually, all who earned their stripes, all who worked hard for the victory of the NDC will be recognized. And I noticed that President Mahama has been magnanimous enough not just to reach out to diehard NDC members who worked hard, but equally to members of the civil society, people who are not NDC card bearing members, are not people who you typically think, in fact, in the past have criticized the president, but have also been appointed to various roles on the basis of merit. The important thing is delivering for the people of Ghana. And I think President Mahama has that at front of mind. I'm particularly heartened by the large contingent of young people that President Mahama is empowering by appointing them to key state institutions, either as CEOs or as ministers, deputy ministers, and so on and so forth. I think that President Mahama is signaling that in this legacy term of his, he is looking to make sure that a new crop of Ghanaians, a new crop of the youth who have a large stake in this country, relative to the likes of those whose heydays are long gone, if I may dare say. I'm talking about the likes of Osafo Mafu and Co., who, not that we say experience doesn't need to be in government, but experience should be in government, but we also need the young whose knees are still well greased, whose elbows are still very much strong enough to bear the shoulders. Somebody has to do the heavy lifting. You know, you want somebody who is going to go 9 to 5 and not somebody who go 10 to 3. Because we know when we get to a certain age, our bodies will strain. And so I'm glad that President Mahama is putting a lot of the young people there, people who are hungry for the development of our country, people who test for the salvation of our people who campaigned, and that's quite gratifying. You know, if I came to a village and campaigned that water should come here, and President Mahama then goes ahead and makes me waterworks boss, that village will be looking at me square in the face, expecting me to deliver. So I'm glad that President Mahama has given the youth a chance. Many of the young people appointed, I've had the privilege to know, work, or at least know them from afar, and I know these are men and women who are ready to work for Ghana. And so I'm rather delighted that President Mahama has done that. He's literally ushering in an entirely new crop of leaders. These are the leaders who would be very topical, very crucial in our governance and leadership space as a nation in the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years. That's what we are talking about. If you look at the likes of the famous likes of Chikata and Co., when they came onto the scene, they were barely in their 30s. And so a lot of the people appointed by President Mahama on average are in their 40s, early, mid to late 40s. And that's quite gratifying that the energy is there. A lot of heavy lifting is required. And where heavy lifting is required, of course, we need all the heavy duty machines to come. But we also need that dose of experience. You know, we have some of the very experienced ones, like my own MP, the Honorable Dr. Rashid Pelpu, who have been around for a while, and they'll be able to provide that guidance. So far, so good, I say. I know there are many still waiting for appointments, whether it's in Ghana or in the diaspora. And I'm very much confident that at the right time, I know that the administration will let there never be a situation where anyone who joined hands to work hard for the return of the NDC to victory will be let down. Because the administration is very clear in its mind that these people who did the heavy lifting are the same people going to do the heavy lifting in 2028 and beyond. And of course, it is gratifying to note that for one of the first few occasions, people who have worked hard, you know, in time past, we have always said monkey the work, baboon the chop. Now we are seeing monkey the work, monkey the chop. If chop means being rewarded with an opportunity to serve your country. So I'm very much glad that President Mahama's appointment so far looks good in the right direction. I'm sure as the weeks go by, the months go by, we'll see more and more young faces coming. Hopefully, by the next time we come, my brother Oraku or Alfred indeed will be applauding one of them for joining the ranks of the many young people who have been provided the opportunity to serve Mother Ghana under President Mahama's government.
Okay. All right. So Alfred, yeah, the speech was relatively long, right? It was about 2 hours, and the president touched on so many issues, right, ranging from the economy, education, you know, issues of women's involvement in politics, right? Just a wide breadth of issues. Now, there are many who say such a speech can be vague. It may take away, it takes away specificity, and it sounds kind of diluted and doesn't really talk about any concrete measures to address existential problems. So what's your overall assessment in that context? Is that a genuine concern about, the president's initial state of the nation?
You want to let me talk about the appointment too?
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, you can take the appointment and then
Okay.
cycle back to that question.
So I know I definitely support the point about the youth, right? How the extent to which the youth has been involved in this. Like, I was very surprised at certain very strategic positions that some of the names that I would see, I'm like, oh yeah, I wouldn't think that someone that young would be considered for those types of positions. So I think that's definitely very commendable. One of the things that the president has failed to do, though, and I mean, the government is still early for us to assess anything, but one of the things that he promised was that 30% of his cabinet was going to be women. Right now, if we include the vice president, I mean, is automatic on cabinet, but if we include the vice president, we're looking at about 14% of cabinet being women. So that was just one thing. I think the other thing, I mean, I wouldn't. We can go into individuals and try to see what was the issue, what was this person. I mean, you could always find something to talk about, but generally thinking of the structure of the government, right? I think definitely reducing the number of ministries, right, was a good signal to people. But I also always, I just have issues with all these Minister of State's appointments, the people that basically get appointed to the presidency, right? So you have a Minister of State in charge of public sector
reforms.
Like we've had that position, like under Mills, we had that position, and then under Mahama one, we had that position. Now we have a Minister of Public Sector Reforms. What have we actually done with those positions, right? We have somebody in charge of now we've moved green transitions to energy, and now we have also appointed somebody in charge of climate change at the presidency. So I think that in as much as we've reduced these ministries and it sends good signal, we just have to be careful with all these Minister of State appointments. I don't know, to me personally, I don't know what value those add, right? That's one thing. The other thing also is I'm a little concerned with the state-owned enterprises. I always and the government agencies. So, for example, I think of like NEEP, the National Entrepreneurship and Innovation Program. It's a very small program, right? So it has a CEO, and then there was a deputy CEO that was appointed. So I think of these, I'm like, because all these people that are getting appointed, we have to think about the compensation package for them and all of that. So at the end of the day, one of the analysis that I'll be looking at for once government presents the budgets on March 11th is how much has compensation actually changed compared to 2024 levels, right? Because with all these, like we have all these now, I think my friend Otukono, the Honorable Otukono today I saw was appointed director in charge of agriculture or something like that. So all these appointments, now regardless, I think no matter how you look at it, of course, the last administration is going to be worse because of the number of presidential staffers that were appointed, right? But we still are talking about reset, right? And so this is some of the things that I want to keep at the back of our minds, right? Like in terms of the appointment. But overall, I think it's all in a good direction. I think there's all these little things that we need to look at, right? In terms of the economy, I think that the president painted like the picture that the president painted. I don't know how else you have painted a picture that you have an economy that is riddled with debt, economy that is in arrears. Like you could see all the state-owned enterprises, a lot of the arrears in ECG, in Cocoa Board, right? So there's all these issues that are happening. So I am not surprised that was the angle that the president started from. Mind you that also, I don't think the state of the nation is where the president is going to communicate deeper policy details, right? I think it probably want to set what the policy direction is going to be, some of the key areas that he's going to focus on and all of that. Again, one of my concerns is that we are talking about an economy in arrears, right? And then the president now also talking about all these other programs, the big push, the 24-hour economy, all these programs are going to cost money, right? But the economy is in crisis. Plus, you're also planning as part of campaign promises to get rid of certain taxes that have been thought to be regressive and all of that. So there's all those that needs to come together. So of course, the budget is going to be key. Right now, there's a lot of investor confidence, right? So when you look at the government treasury bills, there will be a lot of oversubscription. Government is basically rejecting money from investors, right? So that tells you that the investor community is kind of, enthusiastic about the government, call it a new government bounce or whatever, right? But the budgets, it really would solidify that, how the government shows fiscal discipline in terms of what it's planning to spend and all of that. I think is going to be critical to the budget. And I mean, of course, the other thing that we've heard from the NPP, of course, the opposition, has been things around the fact that the president didn't paint a good picture of the economy and that the economy is better. And they've referred to things like GDP growth. And I have a whole presentation that I could go through.
Yeah. So I was going to come to you later on with that question,
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, Conrad, the president came out swinging. He began by reiterating the overwhelming mandate that was given him. He stated the voter margin that he won the election by. And then he proceeded to talk about, give me a second here. And then he proceeded to talk about the state of the economy, right? He mentioned the fact that the previous government had estimated for inflation to be about, I think,
18%.
18%, right? And then they ended up recording 23%, something in that range. And then the cedi depreciated from 19% in 2024, after it had already depreciated by 27%. The debt is about 721 billion Ghana cedis. So he painted a very gloomy picture of the state of Ghana's economy. And again, in the same speech, he made a lot of promises with respect to where he's taking Ghana to. And most of them involved significant capital expenditure. So as Alfred mentioned, he also stated that certain sources of revenue by way of taxation that were implemented by the previous government are going to be removed. So how do you square this cycle? I mean, so I'll go to you, Conrad, with this question. Really, how do you really strike a balance in terms of these seemingly contradictory positions? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. First and foremost, and how do we square that circle? To come back to that circle, I think that you read out that President Mahama said the debt burden was 721 billion. I think that's not the only circle. That circle is bigger. Now, I know one of the answers to the question was a 2-hour speech, 56 pages, but every single page was worth it in my view. When I analyzed it, one thing that is obvious, I've known President Mahama is a man of detail, a man who likes to be very comfortable with what he has to. He does. It's not the type that will write for him and in fact go and copy, plagiarize stuff, that he'll just come and read them. He goes through it and makes sure that he's very clear. He also plays a very active role in actually his own speeches. Almost every page was oozing with details. And that's what the MPP, having read it, came to the conclusion that this is lamentations. It is not lamentations, unless they are biblical. It is a true picture of the pathetic state in which they left the economy. See, the 721 billion you're talking about is the combination of our external and domestic borrowing. If you page through that 56 pages, you see a few more, which I highlighted here. You had Cocoa Board's debt in there, some of which have not been roped into our national debt, 32.5 billion cedis. You had Cocoa Roads, the same Cocoa Board, commitments on Cocoa Roads that they put out, 21.7 billion. You have stalled infrastructure projects, amount committed to them, 44.25 billion. You have cost overruns in relation to those as a result of the stalls, estimated at 15 billion. You have the energy sector debt that they have accumulated. Ignore what they've done with ESLA, another 70 billion. You go into Agenda 111. We have an estimated 22 billion to be able to complete. They've spent an average of $18 million per hospital. Some of those 111 projects, you go there, there is nothing on the ground. It's pretty much like $58 million for National Cathedral, big swimming pool. That's what you have in some of those places. You have unpaid road contractors. Some of them as little as 2,000 Ghana cedi. Imagine you've gone to do a culvert project for the government and they owe you 2,000 Ghana cedi. How much is 2,000 Ghana cedi in dollars? About $100. just about $120, $130. Government still refused to pay, going back as far as 2020. So you can imagine the debt, not just that debt alone, but the interest on all those debt accumulated. 20 billion worth of that for just road contractors. Then you have road projects that have been approved and committed to 105 billion. Add all that to the 721, you get a 1 trillion and 51 billion. And you see, I gave an interview on Radio Gold sometime in November, and I said, look, when the die is cast and everything is laid out, when that frog is died and its true length is known, our debt would exceed $1 billion. And so when President Mahama was going there, naturally for my area of being a numbers person, I totted them up. And I was like, I'm not even surprised. And this is what President Mahama has listed on his State of the Nation address. We haven't even gone to the other areas yet. We have not even talked about the millions, if not almost $1 billion cedis between 2017 to 2024 that we were losing through the National Service Authority scandal and so on and so forth. So you can see that I can understand why the NPP called it lamentation, because it was a true reflection of the mess they've left this country in.
Okay. So, I mean, yeah.
So maybe I'd like to make a little bit of a correction.
Yeah.
So when we were going for the IMF program, right? So before, the national debt, the public debt would only be reported for the central government, right? But because of the IMF program, government has guaranteed some of these, even the cocoa board and all of that stuff, government has guaranteed some of them, right? And so a change was made. So now the public debt, the total public debt actually includes debt from the central government and then state-owned enterprises, as well as all the special purpose vehicles. So I think the 700 and something would include all those other ones that you're talking about. Otherwise, we'll be double counting them.
Okay. So, but Alfred, you have a presentation on the state of Ghana's economy, right? That maybe if you want to really show us a true picture, and then from there I'll go to Oreku with other more policy-oriented questions. So let's present.
Can you see my screen? No.
Not yet. Okay, let me.
So can I just say share screen, right?
Yeah.
And then.
Okay, let me. Yes. Give me a second. Yeah. Okay, give me a second. I gotta do something. Let me. Okay. Yeah, we got it.
You can see the screen now.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see it now. Yes.
So just wanted to touch on a few things regarding the state of the economy, right? Because I think that and this is more, a lot of this might be in response to some of the things that have been happening after the president talked about the state of the nation. One of the main things that we need to think about is that as of July, we haven't actually seen data on the government's fiscal operations since July 2024, right? So even the president, when he talked about the debt and all of that, like we didn't hear anything about the national deficit, like the budget deficit and all that stuff. So when, for example, when the NPP say they left a strong economy, right? One of the things that I know the former finance minister, for example, said, oh, they left behind a decent budget deficit, or at least a decent fiscal deficit, but they haven't actually put a number on it. Part of my suspicion is that, we know that with elections, right, there's always a lot of spending when it comes to elections, and that usually impacts the budget deficit. So one of the things I'm looking forward to seeing is when the finance minister actually presents the budget on March 11th, we'll see what the actual damage was, right? Because the NPP has said things around, like, they've thrown around numbers around GDP growth, international reserves, and those kinds of things. But I mean, of course, those are just some elements, but that doesn't really fully tell the story, right, about the state of the economy when we think. So just to recap, right, in terms of GDP growth, so they've cited the numbers for 2023, 2024, the first 3 quarters. So the 2024 Q3, the economy grew by about 7.2%. On average, in those 3 quarters, the economy grew by about 6.3%. So, I mean, of course, okay, that sounds good. But GDP growth is only one dimension, right? And even with the GDP growth, you also have to understand the composition and the drivers of that growth, because that's important. And one of the things I wanted to show, if you look at the economy, right, and you compare to pre-COVID, like you take the growth you take the GDP and compare across time, you will see that the economy itself started growing above pre-pandemic levels a long time ago, right? So when people start throwing around numbers about what GDP growth has been and all of that, like I just think that it doesn't paint a good picture. So because overall, like as of Q3, the economy has been growing about 18% above pre-pandemic levels. But even when you look at the chart, you can see that yes, there was a dip with the pandemic. A sector like industry, of course, took a while to recover, but services and agriculture and the overall economy recovered a very long time ago above pre-pandemic levels. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing is that even the growth that we are talking about right now, what is driving that growth? Because what is driving the growth is very important as well. When you look at the first 3 quarters, right, you will see that it is industry, and even in industry, it is gold, right? So as gold production has ramped up in Ghana, that is what is really driving the growth in the economy. Now, mining, when we are talking about mining and quarrying, and basically the gold sector, right? It doesn't create a lot of jobs. Like when we are talking about the legal, I'm not talking about all the illegal mining and all of that stuff, because right now what we are made to believe is that it's illegal. Like, so none of that is really going into our official calculations, right? I mean, I don't know the extent to which that is actually true, but let's go with that argument, right? And so mining is it's one of the big subsectors. But it is what is really driving the growth, because information and communication is a very small 3 to 4% GDP contribution subsector, right? So you see that mining itself doesn't really create that significant number of jobs, right? At least the legal mining. So when you look at that, when you look at sectors like crops and cocoa,
so what you're saying is that mining is driving growth in terms of GDP, but not in terms of employment.
I don't because in terms of employment, because its share of employment is not that significant, right?
Okay.
So this is what sometimes economists will call a jobless growth, right? So the economy is growing, right? Because but that's why it's important to look at what is really driving the growth. So if it's mining that's driving it, well, there's not a lot of people that are actually employed by mining in mining, for example. The other thing to look at is, for example, agriculture, crops and cocoa. There's a lot of people that are employed there. There's a lot of people that are employed in fishing. There's a lot of people that are employed in forestry and logging and all those stuff. But when you look at the growth here, like fishing, for example, in Q3, contracted by as high as 22%. That also has implications for food inflation, right? Because that's no surprise in that when you look at our food inflation, when you look at inflation basket, food inflation is stubbornly high. Like it still continues to increase. Look at crops and cocoa, for example. Like you look at, of course, cocoa itself. And then the other thing is also manufacturing, because manufacturing also has a lot of jobs, right? But also manufacturing also is about value addition, right? And so when you think about how that could really impact our import bill and all of that, so if manufacturing is growing at a paltry 3.4% on average in 2023, 2024, right? Then that's why I'm saying that if you just throw around the overall growth numbers to show that the economy is in a good shape, then you might be misleading people, right? The other thing is that, like I said, the economy is like the GDP growth is just one thing. What about the things that actually impact people's pocket? So the rate of price growth, inflation, right? So inflation has been significantly high. Like it has been above 20% for so long. Like we compared December 2023 to December 2024, and the inflation has only decreased or declined by just about 0.2 percentage points, right? So this is something that impacts, and this was what the president was talking about, the fact that we had set a target of 18%, right? And then we ended up with 23%, 23.5% or 23% inflation. Actually, the target range, right? The overall target range for the Bank of Ghana is between 6 to 10%, right? So it's 8% plus or minus 2. And so you could see that we are really, really high. Same thing with food inflation. So when somebody is looking at this, right, and then saying that, oh, we left behind a strong economy, mind you, the economy also couldn't even service its debts, right, to begin with in the first place. The other thing is disaggregate the inflation. Look at food inflation. When you look at our inflation basket, about 43 to 44% of the basket is actually food, right? So it carries a weight because inflation is, the basket is based on weight and all of that. Compared to like in the developing nations where food is usually not that high significant proportion, but it's usually shelter and stuff. In a lot of developing countries like ours, food is one of the biggest contributors, or one of the biggest share of the basket, of the inflation basket. So if your food inflation is growing by about over 20%, like 26% and thereabout, that is going to impact people, right? And so these are the realities, right, that the people are facing, right? So if you throw around numbers around GDP growth to say that you left behind a strong economy, or the fact that you left behind strong reserves, but meanwhile your reserves is also a little stronger because you are not servicing most of your external debts, right? Because you suspended them as a result of all the restructuring that you needed to do. So the other thing on inflation even is that when you look at it, the local inflation is actually higher than imported. So the inflation on locally produced items. So basically, the items that we are producing in our country, right? It is growing at, the price of that is growing at a faster pace compared to what we are importing. Because you would think that with imports, there's all those levies that you need to pay on it. So basically, that what happens then is that in country, your cost of production is high, right? And that is translating into what people are paying when they go to buy stuff. So these are things that people will face, right? So if somebody says they left behind a strong economy by throwing around GDP numbers, that becomes an issue. The other thing that I wanted to show was even the inflation itself, right? The whole disinflation, the fact that inflation, because they always refer to the December 2022 where we saw a lot of the spikes, right? One of the things you see that even when you look at the regions, and this is where, we look at some of the regions, like for example, Greater Accra, like the inflation went down significantly. But then when you look at regions like those in the north, you see that they're still really, really high. Some of them are still in the 30%, even in the national average is about 23%, right? So that's the other thing. And then, of course, there's also interest rate, because again, the cost of borrowing is important. The cost at which people are actually getting money, businesses are getting money. And part of what was driving this is because the government itself is in the market borrowing, right? So the government is borrowing through treasury bills, because that was the only option that was available to the government after all the domestic debt exchange and all of that, and the fact that we've been suspended from the international capital market. And so that is all the stuff that is driving interest. So here I just wanted to show, like, for somebody to say, oh, we left a better economy in we're living a better economy than in 2016, that way you can compare the monetary policy rate, the average interest rate, right? It's way higher than it was in 2016. So you're not living behind a strong economy, by no doubt. And then also credit to the private sector is also key, right? Credit to the private sector, because of course the private sector needs credit to grow. And when and one of the ways you look at credit to private sector is actually comparing to the size of the economy. So you can see, like, in 2015 and the rest, we were about 17% relative to GDP. Now, as of December 2024, we are doing about 9%, right? So that's a significant drop in credit to the private sector. What does that mean? Well, that impacts businesses and their ability to raise capital to be able to grow their businesses and all of that. So these are things, but this is all part of the elevated credit risk that the economy was in, right? So non-performing loan ratios are high. So banks, of course, are less risk averse, and they don't want to be able to be lending to the private sector, especially because the government is there. The government is borrowing from the short end of the treasury of the securities market, and so government can easily just go and borrow, right? So why would they want to take risk with private sector and all of that? They've thrown around the numbers around reserves. So I wanted to show that. So as of December, the reserve is about four months of equivalent to about 4 months of import cover. So that's good, but we have to take into account the fact that one of the reasons why this is the case is because we have suspended our external debt servicing. And if you want to see, you can go to 2022 where you see how the reserves were dropping when we started paying or we kept servicing debt, right? The reason why some of this debt, part of it is because of the domestic gold purchase program. That's no doubt about it. But the other part is also because we have actually suspended our debt servicing on a number of issues, right? You can talk about exchange rates. I mean, exchange rate is another thing, right? Like, the dollar to CD ratio, right? You can look at that. So, I mean, when you look across all these indicators, like, you cannot tell me that you're leaving behind a strong economy. And then the other thing that we haven't even seen is the issue around the fiscal situation itself, right? the money that is actually left for the government, because all these indicators, and so you don't pay your bills with GDP, right? Like for example,
Yeah.
and so the actual money that is left, that was left for the government, that's an issue that hasn't even come up, right? I mean, the president talked about the sinking fund, right? But
Yeah.
So basically,
he said they left $64,000.
Right.
Yeah.
When they had left about $280 million when they were
Exactly. Right. And that part is also very surprising to me because the sinking fund, one of the sources of fund for the sinking fund is actually the petroleum revenue, right? And the watchdog, what is it called? The Public Interest and Accountability, PIAC, right? They've been raising concerns over time about the fact that the finance minister has been arbitrarily setting a cap of $100 million on the stabilization fund. So basically what that means is that whatever is over the stabilization fund would now be transferred into the consolidation fund. So you would think that some of that money would actually be going into the sinking fund in anticipation of all the debts obligations that were coming up, right? So for you for us to see that there's only about 64,000, that was very surprising. So what is happening with all that money? Because PIAC says that if they were doing the right formula for the stabilization fund, they should have been about $530 million that was in the stabilization fund. Somehow the government said we're just capping it at 100 million. So anything above 100 million, we're going to take that money into the consolidation fund. So it's all very surprising. And I think Ghana, and honestly, I think Ghana needs a forensic audit. Like I think that it needs to be to get into the whole oral conversation later on, but I think there just needs to be significant number of audits in different areas to be able to trace where all this monies went to, right? Because like the bulk of the petroleum revenue that Ghana has accrued was actually accrued under the Akufo-Addo government.
Okay.
Right? So what happened to all that money?
Okay. So Orek, we are not really an economist, but just listening to Alfred, do you get the impression that this government, the past government, was unique in the way they mismanaged Ghana, or this is still related to the structural problems that we have dealt with in the past?
So thank you so much for the question. When I was listening to the president, I was a little bit shocked with some of the revelation. I have to be frank. I was shocked with some of the revelation. But at the same time, I asked myself, you got this big mandate because there was something fundamentally wrong with the political party in office. So we want you to do something. And he himself said he's not a type that goes around complaining, and he's going to fix it. So I want to really focus on fixing it, and what are some of the policies and programs that he's putting in place, and also try to understand his rationale and the logic behind his ability to fix it. But for me, yes, I was shocked with some of the revelations, but at the same time too, it's also politics. So you don't expect, I think since 1992, any government that comes in office have always painted the other government black in a lot of sense. But of course, Akufo-Addo's government had some uniqueness in terms of a certain spending pattern. We thought John Mahama's government was unique in 2016, which was true because by the time first term of John, I think they had borrowed close to 80%, 70 to 80% of the GDP. But now I think we are all over the place. So and it tells you that from 1992 to now, although the middle class is expanding, although things look superficially good in Ghana, we've been sinking in terms of the basics. Food has always been a high price or a high consumption expenditure for Ghanaians. That's always been, ever since I was growing up. Always been. When your parents pay your fees and they buy food, the money is done, basically. And food, so when we're in Legon, even some people were eating once or twice. Like it's always been, Ghana has always been an expensive country. Very expensive country. From 1992, ever since we started following politics, very expensive country in terms of food. Rent is not really bad. It depends on where you live, because some places you can even get a place to live for free. But in most cases, we spend a lot of our money on food. And credit issues. We don't have the ability to generate credit from the normal banking system as individuals and use it to do whatever you're going to do. And even if you get it, like first time it started picking up, even if you get it, the interest is crazy. So we have some of these issues. I think Akufo-Addo's government disappointed based on a whole lot of issues. Mismanagement on their side, global factors on the other hand. And we shouldn't really downplay that. And I think Alfred said, unlike the developed world, food is not really a big part. But now it's really a big part of the expenditure. When I look at my own personal expenditure after my mortgage, food is the next biggest item. And I used not to record it. I started recording it recently because everything is crazy now. Avocados I used to buy for $7, it's now $14.
Hey, take that up with Trudeau. This is not.
Yeah, so it's been crazily expensive across the world. But that is also not to absorb Akufo-Addo's government. They mismanaged the country big time. So some of the revelation Mahama said, I was shocked though, especially with that $64,000.
Yeah, that's the second one.
If it is true, then it's, and I don't think the president too will lie or will deliberately tell untruth, but it can also be that the calculation.
I mean, it might be true because, the sinking fund was essentially to service our foreign debt, right? And so we had defaulted, which meant that we didn't have money to pay our debts. So it might be evidence to the fact that we had depleted our reserves and there was nothing left. $64,000. I mean, that's something.
Yeah,
but
that
anyway,
was shocking though. That was shocking for me because what are you going to do is $64,000?
Yeah, as a country.
We have $64,000. So we don't know what's going to use $64,000 for the whole country. So that was shocking. But Alfred's explanation is a little bit making me a little bit. It's really sensible in the sense that maybe they wrote most of them into the consolidated fund. And Ghana, when money entered into the consolidated fund, it's lost. It's gone. You will not be able to trace it. But when it gets to oral, we will look at some of the things because I disagree with this whole forensic thing. Some people are talking about it's a criminal sin. We have to audit the whole country. It's unnecessary. We really have to put in different measures, programs, and policies to stop the bleeding and see what we can do.
Yeah. When I spoke with Bryce Simmons the other time, we spoke about the policy space in Ghana and the fact that there are no multiplicities of vested interest in the policy space, and each of them pushing their agenda whenever we are making policies, right? And with what Alfred has narrated, right, the fact that politicians will come and tell us that GDP has grown by this, and they use that as an indication that they are doing well in government, whereas when you look at employment, these are sectors that are not necessarily bringing people into the labor force. So I think our demands of our governments, we might not actually be that aggressive in terms of demanding output from our governments. Because if you are demanding from your government, unemployment should be a big thing, right? In America, constantly, any government that comes into power, their ability to bring down unemployment is one of the yardsticks for measuring their performance. But in our case, we allow politicians come and brandish numbers in our face that GDP has grown by this margin, yet it could be foreigners who are coming in and doing business, could be the service sector that is growing, but there's no accompanying growth in the well-being of the ordinary person. And I guess it goes back to the lack of competition or struggle among different interest groups within our policy space who would hold government accountable in terms of the policies that they are pushing towards the overall economic growth of our country. All right.
Respond to that or
sorry, just
I mean, Africa can be
So on that point, right? I think it's important because I followed the discussions a number of times, like policy discussions and some extent of policy discussions, and I think usually it just comes down to people say, oh, is this inherently a good thing or inherently a bad thing, right? Versus like getting deeper into the policy. And because part of it is also these politicians don't even release that much information about whatever policy that they are pushing, right? So up till now, we've implemented things like free SHS and one district, one factory and all of that. Like, I don't think anybody can point to any policy paper on any of those stuff. Like, what were the original objectives of these things, right? Like, and to what extent are we actually meeting those objectives? Of course, the extent at which we are meeting those objectives doesn't even come in, because we are not even discussing those objectives. It's like, it is all just politicized. Like, your free SHS, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? 1B1F, is it a good thing? 24-hour economy, is it a good thing or bad thing? So this whole oral thing that we've been talking about, like, there's a lot of things happening about it. Some people are saying it's a witch hunt and all of that, but frame it as a policy, right? And then start the discussion. And then it's like, okay, what are the outcomes that we are hoping to achieve? And then how will we know that we've achieved those outcomes? So we can talk about a lot of that. The other thing that you mentioned about employment, even, right? So this week, the Ghana Statistical Service released a report about employment over time. And it's funny that, you always hear people talk about the number of jobs that have been created and all of that. But what about population growth, right? So if you create 500,000 jobs, like, what are the indicators that are telling you that your economy is actually creating jobs to absorb the population growth and all of that? So, for example, in 2017, right, about 71% of the population was employed. That is, of course, the excluding those that are in school and all of us. But those 15 plus is usually the age group that is used. 71% in 2017. When you look at the latest data in 2023, it's actually 62. It has reduced to 62% of the population. Right. But here you have politicians will be confusing, obfuscating the issues, throwing around numbers around, creating 2-point-something million jobs and all of that. And I think it's about, like, who is there to challenge those types of arguments and be able to probe those, right? And show that there are alternatives that tells you that maybe this number that you are saying might not be correct. Right. But again, we don't politicize that enough. Right. It's just, oh, yeah, my party has said this and I'm going to just follow it. And right now we're seeing that played out. The NDC government, like, you should see me on Twitter, like, arguing with people or people arguing with me about some things that I've said about certain things. But I'm making comparisons to what we saw before, right? It starts small. People will defend everything. Like the example of the president flying his brothers, going with his brothers' private jet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Potential conflict of interest issues there. But people wouldn't understand that just because it's their political party, they want to be able to defend that. Right, so I think that's the issue that we face. Like, we are not asking the right questions of politicians, right? We are not asking them to really release this information. We've said we've done gold for oil as an example, right? One of the things we did gold for oil. They told us a whole bunch of things that gold for oil was supposed to do. We didn't really see those manifest. There wasn't any evaluation. The NDC now is trying to do a gold board, which is also going to basically be something similar to that, without actually telling the Ghanaian people what was the impact of the gold for oil and all of those stuff, right? So it's just, but then when you say, people say, well, government's the continuum, and so they're just going to continue. But it's like, if you're not assessing what has been done to understand the issues, how are you sure that this policy proposal that you're making is going to change or achieve those outcomes that you think you want to achieve?
Okay, so let me move quickly to oral, and I'll bring Conrad in. I mean, the president mentioned oral in his speech. He also made mention of the national service fraud, and that he has asked that those involved should be, taken through due process and prosecuted. And also, he alleged that some had left the country and that action should be taken, or steps should be taken, to freeze their assets and all that. Right. He also mentioned the Agenda 111, which is a flagship project of the previous administration, whereby it is alleged about $400 million was spent, yet there's no work to show for it. Oral presented over 2,000 cases of potential fraud by former members of the previous government, right? And Alfred, I don't know if you remember the exact figure that they mentioned, because the committee said they could potentially recover
over $21 billion.
$2.1 billion.
21 billion.
$21 billion, right? They said they could potentially recover $21 billion. Now, I had a conversation with Bright Simmons, and he talked about the nature of government projects, right? And that sometimes government can spend a lot of money on a project without no work to show for it. Yet, it will be extremely difficult to pin it on one person and potentially prosecute them for maybe mismanaging funds or even stealing it. So, how do you think the government really intends to execute oral? Again, Bryce Seymour says that if they're able to recover 12% of what they claim they can recover, that would be extreme success.
Thank you very much, Doc. And I just, before I carry on with oral, just a few observations. I think that yourself and my brother Uraku have a very beautiful way of euphemistically terming something called unique. The MPP's unique way of governance, which in my view is a euphemism for some very callously irresponsible incompetence. You know, how do you explain? I mean, to put it in context, my reason is this. You notice that the government had to pay just over 9 billion cedis in DDP in early February. And the accounts that were allocated for which proceeds to pay that debt were these two sinking fund accounts, the dollar denominated one and the CD denominated one. And this is where let me apologize to our MPP brothers, because we have misrepresented the amount they left. They actually left more than what we said. We said they left $64,000. Let me be charitable to them. You see, they left $64,307. So we missed the $307. Lest they go on the social media and then they prosecute us for that. But to put it, and to be fair, on the CD account, they left 143 million Ghana cedis. This would have blown off like nothing. The NDC wouldn't have made noise about it, except for the fact that the former minister, I would say in a haste to outdo himself, came and made clear that they had left millions of dollars in the accounts, only for us to find that they left $64,307 and 143 million Ghana cedis in the account, when the total amount that was needed was roughly about what? 9 billion. That's about $600 million dollars. We needed $600 million. They left us $64,000. This is not just incompetence. This is a callous attempt to hobble the economy and stop the government from being able to take off. I mean, you inherit a government. In less than a month, you're supposed to pay the equivalent of 600 million, and they've left you 64,000 in it. So I don't just believe it's unique, or it was unintentional, or it was reckless. It was callous and incompetent for anybody to do that. And I think that just to clarify to my brother Alfred, look, our gold board is not meant to do the same as gold for oil. I mean, you ask, we don't have any information on what the gold board ended up giving us. I don't see the benefit. It was basically barter trade. You are selling a precious mineral like gold, giving it to somebody for oil. If this is not barter, what else is it? It was lack of bereft of common sense, especially when the price of gold was going up. And we lost about $90 million. That's over 1.3 billion. I mean, as of January, that's what the estimate is. $90 million dollars was lost as a result of that program. But the gold board is meant to act like cocoa board. It's meant to make sure that we are bringing in, look, if you're a small-scale farmer, legitimately licensed small-scale farmer, not the galamseyers, we get a mechanism just like gold cocoa board does for cocoa farmers. We do to same. Bring it together so that we are able to make sure that Ghana benefits from the exports. Because when the UAE tells us, based on their custom records, how much gold has come from Ghana, there's a vast difference between that and what our people declare as how much gold has gone to them. And this is the intention to stop it. We are not doing the barter thing. But now to the specifics of your question. And look, I admit, Alfred, that yes, ideally, and the IMF forced that effectively to make sure we were reporting all our debts and not below the line type reportage. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of the things that are coming up now, as you can appreciate, we are finding monies that they were hiding from the IMF. Because the IMF doesn't have its own analysts in the government departments. What you declare to them is what they have, subject to they coming out to do, if you like, a full-blown audit. Of course, we will see one in April, and we will know how long that frog truly is, given that it's now well and perfectly dead. As for the oral thing, even if I remove the principle of oral aside, there's been so much rot in the last 8 years that something must happen. Otherwise, we might as well forget about democracy. If you look at the amount of tax revenue we have collected, when you tot it all up over the last 4 years, we've been making fantastic, over $1 billion Ghana cedis revenue on average over the last few years. That's just the revenue alone. We're not even talking about the borrowing. We're not even talking about the oil proceeds that Alfred mentioned. There's so much money that has come into our resource, if you like it. We've never had so much income in the history of the Fourth Republic in Ghana. And yet, ironically, in that same period, we have stacked up the highest amount of debt accumulation, 721 million. Let's even use that conservative figure. That is 600 billion more than the 120 billion that was.
So, I mean, but Conrad, look, I mean, I think we acknowledge, the waste in the system, but I guess
the point I'm making, Doc, is this. Yeah. I want to set the scene for the fact that something needs to be done.
Okay.
Some people don't like the name oral.
Yeah.
Call it whatever it is, but accountability needs to be exacted on the people. I don't need to go through the NAC scandal and what you saw there. I don't need to even go through this Agenda 111. We know there's a lot of rot there. The NDC's call for oral recovery of loot, not jail them and let them get away with it. No. Otherwise, I come into government, I steal billions, you jail me, but my descendants will forever worship me and even build a statue for me because I put them on a different planet of wealth. People have to not only be jailed, but the resources have to be taken away from them, so that it will serve as a deterrent to others that if you steal, we will get you, and when we get you, we'll strip you of those resources together with the penalty and still deprive you of your freedom for a significant period. I think every Ghanaian, every well-thinking Ghanaian is solidly behind that approach, and that is why we choose to call oral. I know my brother Dominic Ayine, Dr. Dominic Ayine, has talked about potentially using the magistrates. I don't know why the MPP are so scared about it. It's called the tribunals. In the UK, we have magistrates, laymen. That's what I see the tribunal as. We can use it. But whatever we use, whether it is, let's be honest, the current laws, the law courts, the current judiciary is corrupt, and they're part of it. We need to make sure that oral really works, and the people should be involved. Whether it's through a people's magistrate system where you have a proper legal person sat side by side advising them, but making sure that we exact justice and we recover all loot, every single loot that left our country. How is it that Ghanaian investors in the last 8 years became the largest individual private investors in Guyana's oil industry? I'm talking about Guyana in South America, not our Ghana. And you know where it's traced to? Elements in the presidency. You have our own jersey here. There's the tax savings around here. They've been flying here with all kinds of loot. We must get them back. Whether it's by oral or any other name someone calls it. If anybody is thinking that my brother is sitting at the High Court or Supreme Court waiting for you to bring there so they will do UFC and send you back. If we have to take a single person 10 times to court and eventually get what we have to get from them, we must do it. And I support Oraku and Alfred's call for full-blown audit. I think that the oral, perhaps the 21 billion might be a very, not a conservative number, but we need to do a full debt audit. That's the starting point.
Well, you think that number is rather conservative?
Well,
yeah, okay.
If you know what has happened, I mean, if it is, just think about it. How much money off head? What we have, what has happened versus what's lost. How much is gone to? It's shocking us because we've never been in that particular space before. But I'm not. People have become billionaires in dollars, so in our Ghana.
Yeah.
Just because they know somebody.
Okay.
And I'm not saying everything you do there is corruption, but we know the way people have done things. They force private companies to pad government contracts huge.
Yeah.
Imagine I was the brother of the president in 2017. I was given $20 million just to review cases. So I suddenly set up a law firm and quickly get $20 million, and that is the beginning of it. There were many people, the cousin of the president, Gabi, at the African Law Associates. It's public knowledge. There are many cases where if you go to do business, yesterday I was talking to one of them, I met somebody in London on this. They go to do business and they are told, add this amount in there, and then we will give you the decision to cash hours first before we even allow that. big international corporations in billions. So we need to do that oral.
Okay.
Perhaps Alfred and Uraku, who may not be in the thick of things like those of us who have decided that we sacrifice our partisanship and we are fully on board with the NDC, not that we won't see the middle of the road. If you have better ideas, let's put them on the table. But as Ghanaians, we must all rally round and make sure that that 12% should not even be what we should be aiming for. Look,
okay,
no mercy for the cripple.
Yeah. So, but
if
you
somebody
see,
is caught, whether they know President Mahama or they are his brother, they must all be dealt with. Otherwise, forget it. You and I will rip our nation off to buy jacuzzis going forward if we can get away with it.
Yeah, I mean, the problem here is that given the nature of the waste in the system, the argument is that you may not be able to trace it to a single individual. That the policy-making process or the approval of money for projects is so muddy that pinpointing a specific culprit for the waste might be actually difficult to do. So, for instance, they talked about the Palubu Dam situation where they had already spent $12 million. That $12 million was based on a contractual agreement between the government and the contractor. The money was paid out to the government, to the contractor. Now, if there are some deals, shady deals between the contractor and the awardees of the contracts, it might be difficult for you to really tease that out. But nevertheless, the $12 million is gone.
As an auditor, I disagree. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Corruption is a collective exercise. So when you even go into corruption studies, the likes of Rothstein and co will tell you that the whole thing and looking at it from a social contract perspective is difficult to if you like, arrest the problem because there's collectivity in it. So if we argue that, look, it's not just one person, there are many. That's a valid point. And in every corrupt exercise, there's always a lot of collusion on that. But let me say, I'll take the Palu one and I'll take this Sky Train thing. Ultimately, somebody signs something for someone somewhere. So if you take the case of the what do you call it, the Sky thing, Sky Train, we don't even have ground trains. We are talking about Sky. If not this nonsense, what else is it? The man who has been arrested and put on bail signed off for the payment of $2 million to be made. If you get an invoice to sign, you need evidence of proof of work. What did you see? What made you release that? You should be held to account. If that $2 million was then given to you, Mark, and you brought it behind the scenes, myself, you, Uraku, and Alfred shared, you cough. Next time, you won't do that again.
No, but you see,
you get your accounts.
Yeah.
Right? You see, if you go forensic, that corruption, unless you were cashing that $2 million and sharing on paper, we will, if you follow where huge money moves and you follow the trail, you will get the people.
Okay.
Where contractors are part of it, and in our part of the country, it is true. Most of the contractors, they dabble in corruption. So take the Palu project again. 12 million is gone. So somebody signed the contract. Because you signed contract and signed the invoice, we would hold you to account and lock you up. If you tell me that you signed 2 million for no job done, or 12 million for no job done, and you got no penny from it, and it's out of what? You are telling me, oh, this was just a mistake. It's not a mistake. You should be punished for it. If you decided to be monkey to sign it for someone to chop, go to jail on that person's behalf so that the next person won't do that. But I can tell you, those kind of contractors, remember, I used this case when an international company, a company of international repute, is fingered in a deal like this, where they've received money for no work done, and they are taking on because they do projects elsewhere, they will quietly come behind and return the money, and you can blacklist them. Why do you think our Zoom Lion was blacklisted by the World Bank in Liberia? So it is about us not saying that it is impossible. Remember the child that says they won't climb the tree will stay at the bottom. The one that says I will climb, whatever happens, they will climb it. So I think we should go after them without any share of that in our mind that we won't get them. Whatever it takes, come hell or high water, let's get people. Heads must roll for it. Even if it's getting the main head and the other small heads go, next time, the small heads, when they go to another big head for him to sign, he will know that he's not signing his own death warrant.
All right. Okay, so Alfred, now going back to the same conversation with respect to how much oral is likely to recover, and then using the Palugu case as an example. Now, the $12 million that was paid out was perfectly legal. You have a project that is $900 million. The project is worth $900 million. If you pay out $12 million, that is minuscule of the overall cost of the project. So you won't really expect to see much work done. But again, that money is very significant. Like $12 million is a lot of money. It's not chicken change. So if people are arguing that they haven't seen any work done, given the magnitude of the overall project, you're not really going to see much done if you have paid only $12 million. So can you really hold somebody responsible and say that they wasted money on a project and there's no work done? And
Yeah,
I'm not saying
no,
this to
I think
absolve them, but I'm just saying this to say that perhaps we need structural changes, right? So that some of these leakages don't happen, because at the end of the day, it might actually be difficult to pin down someone down for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the whole public procurement practices and all of that, there's just definitely significant overhaul that needs to happen there, right? But one thing that I wanted to mention, though, in the whole oral conversation, is I'm thinking about what has happened recently in the Sagalami case, in the banking sector cleanup case, in the SNET and the Thompson SNET case, which other one? The Opuni case. They were all cases of causing financial loss to the state, right? These were people that I think the NDC felt that they were politically being persecuted, right? And I'm saying that within the context of oral, in the sense that would people that when we find people corporate, when we are successful at prosecuting people, or will they be biding their time? Will they be stalling to wait for a favorable government to come to power and set them free, like has happened in these cases that I mentioned, right? So I think that's a food for thought for oral as a whole, in terms of how we are approaching our whole thing, because I mean the court system is slow, like if you will, like, and I don't think you would disagree with that, right? And so look at the Opuni case. There were so many delays that were introduced. Even the defendant himself introduced some certain delays into the whole process, right? So now he's free, right? But what happens to the state's money that was involved? The Saglemy case, for example, the whatever about $200 million or whatever that was involved in that. What happens to that? In the case of the banking sector cleanup, right, where and I'm not saying that Dr. Siama was guilty of anything, but what has happened? Because basically the Bank of Ghana, whatever Bank of Ghana money that went to Unibank or UT or whatever, what happens to that money? And then what also happens to the whole banking sector cleanup? So in as much as we are saying we are recovering loots, right, are we letting things go, right? Because at the end of the day, it is Ghana, it is not NDC or it's not MPP, right? So that has implications for oral. The other thing that I say, and I continue to say, is that oral has to manage people's expectations. Throwing around numbers like $21 billion, even our friend Conrad is saying it could even be more.
Yeah.
Right. But when you actually look at some of the details that have been put out, right, oral is actually overestimating a lot of these things. Like one example is the National Service Scheme, right? So the presentation that the Honorable Ablakwa gave on Joy News, I think, was that the National Service Scheme was actually 4.5 billion. But that's not correct. Like that's not possible, because there's no way the National Service Scheme, even when you look at their budget from whenever national service started to now, there is no way they would have had $4.5 billion. $4.5 billion is actually about half of the whole country's budget. So when you actually do the calculation, you know that you see that it is actually way less than that. It is in the millions, not in billions. Another example I'll give you is the printing of the money, the Bank of Ghana monetary financing in 2022, right? That has been listed as a scandal that potentially we can recover about $5 billion. That is basically the whole 80 billion that was printed, whatever amount that was printed, right? But remember that money was printed to be used in the appropriation. Like it was actually spent on government spending.
Expenditure.
So where is the recovery going to come from, right? SML is one of the other ones that have been listed. It says 3 billion SML. The 3 billion, the SML contract, the part about the upstream was actually cancelled, right? So that contract actually didn't go forward. So if you list that as an amount that can be recovered for a contract that was actually cancelled, right? The upstream part was cancelled. Yes, maybe you can recover some of the downstream part of the whole contract. So this is why I say that the oral has to really make sure that it manages people's expectations, because I say that because the government will still have to raise revenue somehow, right? So if you have thrown around these numbers as things that you can recover, and then down the line, 2 years or so down the line, you are not able to recover this to that extent. But now you also have to run the government. You still have to raise taxes. You have to do all these things to do that. How do you now go back to the people and say, how do you generate support for government fiscal measures or revenue measures to say that we need to raise money to run the government? So that's why I say that I had all these questions, because I think the numbers in Oro, at least from what we have seen, they have been overinflated, right? In terms of now, maybe they might get in there and find more things, but I could go on. Like there are some other examples on there that you can go on and on, which is why I think that one, Oro itself has to be framed as a policy. They have to tell us, okay, what is the overall goal of Oro? Because recover all loot sounds to me that, you want to recover all the loot that you've identified. But can you actually recover all the loot? So what is your target? Like, what is your target for prosecution? What is your target for recovery? Like, you need to really be able to tell us. This is the point that I talk about the policy discussions, right? Because, and of course, Oro itself is going to cost money too. Because think of investigations that need to happen. All these cases that if you look at the AG's caseload per year and look at how many potential cases he has to deal with Oro, it's going to be a lot of cases. So that's going to come at a cost. So Oro itself also needs to be costed. And then the Ghanaian people need to be told that. So, for example, if you end up going to spend, I don't know, some $1 million on Oro and you're able to recover just this much, was it worth it? I mean, I get the point about sending a message to people. You cannot just steal the state funds and go scot-free and all of that. But that message also get contradicted by the fact that people that have been accused of causing financial loss to the state are being let go because their party is in power. Party that favors them is in power, right? So I think that there's policy incoherence in that regard as well. So I think that we really need to look at this whole Oro thing. And this is why I say that it's not a discussion of whether Oro is a good thing or is a bad thing. If we can recover loot, absolutely, because we need money. And we know our money has gone to places. Now, I think the other part that Oro hasn't really talked about, right? There have been a lot of projects, I think, that we have looked at where, the government has used all these digitalization things and there have been monies there. And the Oro is not even looking at that. And some of those projects are actually still ongoing. SML is still ongoing, right? The government made a lot, this current government, when they were in opposition, talk about SML a lot. So one of the things that I thought would happen is that when the government comes, one of the first things they would do is say, put a cost on SML, put a cost on LGVG and all those other things that are supposed to do revenue assurance and siphoning our money here and there. Those things are all still going.
Yeah.
So are we really sure about this overall thing? Right? I think that we need to really have these discussions because it sounds good to everybody that people are still in the state money. We need to get them back. But are we sending the right signal? Are we sending the right target and all of that? So those are my thoughts on that.
All right. Okay. So, but yeah, Oriku. Again, I mean, Alfred mentioned that.
To add a few points, if I may.
Yeah.
Mark, quickly.
Yeah.
See, when I said that it's conservative, in my view, it was because I was clear in my mind that the work that Oral did not cover everything that we all even know from an anecdotal point of view. And so there's still the capacity to thought up on that. Whether the number, the contents of that itself should merit what they mentioned, that's not what I went into. But what I mean is that it's conservative in the context of many others we know of. And I think we can all agree on that. I also agree that, look, the justice system must be sped up. We should focus more on recovery than necessarily on punishment. But that must also happen. The punishment must happen. But people's assets must be frozen. We need to set a precedent. Now, as for the previous cases, and I'm not here to defend, for me, I don't care who you are. If you have been involved in malfeasance, you must go to jail. And it's true, as Alfred said, that we must focus on recovery. For example, what has happened to the money that Dr. Johnson Isiama was accused of misappropriating, causing financial loss for? The truth is that there was no such money. And that's why the case was stuck. Because when they ended up in court, the question was, okay, you accuse him of causing financial loss to the state by giving this amount of money to so-and-so bank. Where is that money? It turned out that a large chunk of that money had been repaid by the bank to the Bank of Ghana. And the remaining amount was sat with UMB, over which Bank of Ghana had effectively had an encumbrance of which UMB cannot take it out without Bank of Ghana coming to them. So there was no financial loss to the state. And that is the main reason why his case was effectively just put there. In fact, the same state prosecutors wrote to say, this charge cannot stand because there's no financial loss. Let's leave it. So I agree that, look, if we were willy-nilly just releasing people because they're NDC, because they're party people, then oral will be a hypocritical exercise. But from what I know, using, for example, the Bob case, there's no financial loss. In the UK, you guys had, I believe, a trouble asset recovery program. In the US, in the UK, we had a similar one where government invested or took over certain banks that were on the brink of collapsing, invested in them, like Lloyd's Bank, and got its money back. How are you going to go and prosecute the Bank of England then, governor then, because you got the money back? So we have to be contextual about it. But whatever it is, we must still send a signal. If oral doesn't work, then you and I must as well forget about Ghana. It's not going to be free for all. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So, Oriku, I mean, Alfred says that we should have sort of the intent of solving a problem when it comes to some of these initiatives, especially with ORA. What problem are we seeking to solve? Are we seeking to prevent the consistent leakage of government funds through projects? And how do we seek to do that? By oral, do we want to set an example of prosecuting past government officials so that it becomes the structural change that we need to prevent that leakage from happening? Or within oral, do we intend to fill some of those loopholes that make it possible for politicians to dish out projects, contracts without due diligence, right? Without value for money analysis. So again, is oral solving the problem? Or these are these issues that you should really incorporate into the concept of oral?
So I think what we are confronted with as a country is that we have corruption and we also have waste. And in our case, they are combined. And in most cases, the design of the policies and programs have a corrupt intent built in it, either corrupt intent or partisan intent. So in most cases, that's how come all our flagship programs end up becoming Operation Create, Loot, and Share. And that has been with us for a very long time. But for me, when I hear politicians openly talking about using the criminal justice system, talking about we're going to recover all loot, we're going to prosecute. I tell myself these guys are very smart. They know exactly what they're talking about, and they know very well that they will not be able to prosecute anybody. They know very well that they cannot recover anything. They know. They know. And that is why Ablakwa came out to openly start mentioning names, talking about how many. It is purely political calculus. And that political calculus is what we've been doing to our country. We've been playing political football, political games. So ORA is good. It will serve a purpose, and that purpose is political games. If we are really serious about fighting corruption as a country, we should know that nowhere in the world can you use the criminal justice system to fight endemic corruption. When corruption is built in your programs, is built in your policies, and basically everybody is corrupt. And Conrad talked about even the criminal justice system. If we have all these issues, and corruption is one of those few things you don't need evidence, actually. You just need perception. And once you have the perception that the system is corrupt, all you need is to try to prevent it. If you are going to allow people to loot, and your goal is that when they loot, you are going to chase them, you're wasting your time as a government.
Yeah.
You are purely wasting your time because, like Alfred said, you are going to spend money to chase them.
Yeah.
And you will not be able to recover even this whole operation of recover all loot. I don't think they will be able to recover even 6%.
Yeah.
Because when crime becomes so pervasive, it becomes hard to track. These politicians are smart because when they are making the policies and programs, they design corruption into it. And we also get waste. Like in other parts of the world, the corruption is in there, but the waste is really avoided. And they don't really cause so much waste in normal public goods like roads and the rest. They might inflate it and make $1 or $2 on it, but the road will be done and it will be done well. But if the road end up washing away with the following year rain, there will be huge audit. In our part of the world, we don't do that.
Yeah.
So for me, practical step, Office of the Special Prosecutor, that office must go. There's no way that office can fight corruption. The OSP, that office, is a waste of resources. That the people working there, like Alfred said, we have to cost things. How much are they receiving? What is their salary? What is the whole staff capacity? How much are they receiving? What have they done?
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is that even if the criminal justice system is effective, it will take you on average 6 years, 5 years to prosecute one criminal case in terms of corruption of that nature, because it's hard. And we have a system, a criminal justice system, where every case can travel to the Supreme Court. So even if you have a solid case, you have all the evidence, it's still going to be hard to prosecute one person. Not to talk about so many people that we are accusing the past government of being involved. I believe that if we really are serious, if Mahama is really serious about resetting the country, we can take up basic steps to first prevent anybody from his administration from engaging in corruption. He shouldn't think that if the loophole is still there, his people are not going to take advantage of it. They are going to. They are human beings. They are going to take advantage of it. What are they going to do to prevent it? So that if he still want to go on to the aura and chase the past government, that is allowed. He should do that. But if they haven't stopped the bleeding and the bleeding is still going on, and they are going around to chase, then that to me is not a proper use of our money, and the reset is not going to happen. So these are some of the practical things that anybody who wants to fight corruption does. The only reason why we don't have a lot of corruption cases in some parts of the world is that they prevented it. It's not that the people don't have the...
they prevent it from every step of the way, right?
Because you can work in the bank and you will never see $2,000. They prevent even your ability to see cash. They have cameras, they've invested in that. So we shouldn't even allow people to be able to steal money. And when we have new programs coming on, without even looking at the previous programs and what resulted of it, we have new programs, we have new ideas, and when politicians, once they assume office and they start bringing in a lot of things in Ghana, we have to think about it.
Yeah.
Like now, coming out that even the SHS numbers.
SHS, the numbers were inflated.
And it's shocking. And it means that if it's inflated, it means that the money that they were paying.
Exactly.
How are you going to retrieve that? How are you going to retrieve that money? How are you going to retrieve
that? How do we prevent it from happening in the first place? And going back to that point, look, I read Kwame Ahoy's book.
Mark, quick one. Just before you go far, you see, when we ask the question, how are we going to retrieve this thing? One thing I'm very clear, at the risk of sounding like the happy-go-lucky, Sunni-eyed, perpetual optimist. Follow the money. You see, even where we say, oh, this is not corruption, they are just abusing the system. So I'm supposed I have ordered 1 million paper clips. And so I didn't know there was 100,000 paper clips in there. Look, if you follow the money, let's put it 2 scenarios. As I am a public officer, you should be able to have a full audit of my accounts wherever they are, whether they are in Ghana or anywhere. And if you are then able to see any unexplained money coming from somewhere, follow that money. Because I can tell you for free that behind that 1 million excess paper clip order, somebody is giving me a kickback from somewhere.
But Ghana, we pay cash. We deal with cash.
So we need to be very ruthless on that front. Because you see, we have in the name of, how many asset freezes have you seen by politicians in Ghana? We take them to court and leave their assets in their account earning even interest. So
but they don't put most of their assets in their names.
Yes.
Good.
But you deal in cash in most of the things. These politicians are always carrying Ghana must go. All of them across the board.
You see, in Western jurisdictions, you find they'll tell you politically exposed person. A judge is a politically exposed person. Your entire family. So if you are a judge and I am your cousin, and I go to open a bank account, I am a politically exposed person. If you follow the
that's
money,
what you have to
few
do,
thieves will
Conrad.
put their money
Conrad, you
in
guys have to do
somebody's
that.
listen.
Yeah.
You see, so
So
that is where we have to be ruthless and go down that route. If my father is a politician and the government comes and freezes his asset, they should follow me too.
Mhm.
If you see that
Yeah.
is my salary in that account, I'm free. If you see unexplained money there, I must
Mhm.
enjoy the consequences. Suffer the consequences as I enjoy
Conrad
with my
is
father.
in the UK. You go to Ghana.
You know, so we,
Yeah.
we need to be ruthless in that particular approach. If we don't do that, because a lot of the things, look, some of them, you guys in the States will call them a slam dunk. This NSA thing, why my own government has not even called those people, locked them up and thrown the keys away until we know why, I don't understand. It's a clear, straight case.
Yeah.
You bring to Parliament 180,000 and you go and put in 150. We don't care who puts it at first. All
Yeah.
of you, the accountant, the bosses, all of them, catch them, lock them up, freeze all their accounts. They will start talking,
Yeah.
trust me.
Yeah.
And one of them will sink. And
But
then
how
we
are you
get
going to
into
do
the
that? You got
Yeah,
to
but that's not gonna. So
Look,
this is the
but-
other thing with the
it will
aura.
work
Right?
because
That's
you
the
see,
other thing with aura.
our bodies have got a lot of power. We have,
Yeah.
look,
But
the police,
Conrad,
all
but
these
Conrad,
bodies fire on each
yes,
other.
Conrad.
You see what we do to each other as politicians. We
Yeah,
go and
Conrad.
arrest you on a Friday or night
Mhm.
so that you don't have bail. Look,
Conrad,
if we
but
keep
Conrad,
doing
but
this, and not just to the politicians.
Yeah.
1 second, Mark.
Yeah.
I would like NDC to lock up NPP and NPP to lock up NDC. You know who's going to
Yes.
benefit? The Ghanaian.
The Ghanaian, yes,
Because
no, absolutely,
if I know
yeah.
that when
No.
NPP come, they will do to me as they are doing to NDC, the NPP guys now. The fear of God will be in me. So we must push.
That is really not the that is
The
not the case.
civic society must push for it.
That will not be
You
rational.
know,
If
when
I know I
Brian
consume,
Samuels was telling you, the reason corruption is paramount in a part of the world is because the civil society just looks askance and say, well, they are all the
Yeah,
same.
but
Let them
Conrad, the thing is, detecting those malfeasances are not built into the system. So what you are saying right now
Mark,
is
they are. I'll tell you why.
no.
Look, they
okay,
are.
let me.
Forensically.
Yeah.
Look, and
because-
our banks,
first
a
of
lot
all-
of our banks, they know what is happening. You can't move 1 billion Ghana cedis in Ghana in cash.
Yes.
Somebody in some bank somewhere, and when you catch the manager who signed and put that exemption for it to pass through, they must also go in the slammer. Whether they benefit
I
or not.
agree that punishment would do some of the work, right? But we can't entirely put it on punishment. We have to tackle some of the systemic inadequacies that allow that to happen to begin with.
Look, I agree with you. You see, I used to believe, but I don't disagree with systemic issues.
Conrad,
the problem is, you know, a lot of our policies come from the West. We actually copy and paste. Go to the public procurement authority.
Yes, but that's the reason.
People circumvent them.
Yes,
right?
but that's the problem, right? We have
So
local
when
ways
someone
of
circumvents
circumventing
it,
them.
Conrad, you are
deal
behaving
with
like
that person so ruthlessly.
let Mark finish.
Yeah, no, but what I'm even
Zelensky.
trying to say is that maybe we are speaking the same language, but we're just talking past each other. Because what I think is that we have local ways of circumventing some of these copy and paste policies that we have implemented. But let's look within and sincerely confront some of these loopholes. That, for instance, in our case, we deal predominantly with cash. How are we going to address that problem where a contractor is awarded a certain amount of money, it is signed off, and he takes the money, but it's more or less a gentleman's agreement with the one who awarded the contract, and the person pays him back in cash, right? There are some of these problems. How do we address that problem? How do we prevent it from happening?
And as an auditor in the banking world, let me tell you for free.
No, correct. But I just wanted to conclude that perhaps these are some of the things that perhaps maybe oral should incorporate so that we know that we are addressing a problem that is persistent and it goes beyond one administration to the other, right? You can come and prosecute them and the other guy comes and doesn't. And then we go back to the same problem. And I'll give an example. Kwame Nkrumah's book, Working with Rawlings, he recounts a situation where they arrested a young man who was working with the Attorney General's department. In fact, he was stopped at one of those military days stops, right? Military stops. And they inspected his car, they searched his car and found guns in the trunk of his car. Now, that was an entirely different matter. It raised security issues. It was a military regime, and so, and then they started investigating the guy, and they found out that he worked at the Controller and Accountants General Department, and this guy was siphoning money, writing fake checks and cashing them. And then they decided to do an audit. And the audit turned out to be like a grand conspiracy. It went all the way to almost all the secondary schools across the country. The Bezos were in cahoots with officers at the Accountants General Department, and they were. I mean, so when they started investigating, at some point, Kwame Nkrumah says that he had to tell Rawlings that, look, if they don't stop this investigation, they are going to collapse the entire public service of Ghana. So at some point, the ones that were found to have stolen large amounts of money were dismissed. They prosecuted a couple of people here and there. They decided that they will take a name and shame approach by publishing the names of the people who were found culpable of some of these acts. And that's where the thing ended.
And
so maybe they could have solved the problem from that point.
Look, if the entire public service is coming down and you have to change every single clerk because of that, so be it. It would have sent a shock.
I mean, I agree with you.
System. Yeah.
No,
but you see, I just wanted to add something small. We have all the copious laws. The few that I know of, my interest in these areas. Look, if they come to your house and catch you with $100,000, you should not be keeping that amount of money even in your house to begin with.
Yeah.
But what do we do? Look at the case of Cecilia Dapa. If it was in a country, the law would have been enforced. The money will be retrieved. You have to come and prove where you got that money. We let it go. So,
no, Conrad, I think we generally all agree. But
I want to say, if you walk into your bank now in Ghana and go and withdraw 100,000 Ghana cedi, those transactions are reported daily to the what? Central Bank.
Yes.
Every single such transaction. So if a person who's a contractor goes there and withdraws 1 billion in cash and you want to follow, you can follow. It is about the appetite of not just of the professionals, the political class to actually take advantage of the system that are in place. We have seen this too much. Look, one small example, and I will stop making too much noise. The last time there was, a very funny story in one of a corruption paper I was reading as part of some work I was doing. World Bank came and did a biometric payroll system for us under the IPPS thing. And they enabled the biometric verification before payment. They went away and came back for post-review. They found out the problem had doubled. You know what happened? Somebody decided they should show them how to create an exemption, right? For every rule, there's always
yes.
As soon as they were gone, the system was working fine as they proved it. They went and made the exemption now the rule. And by the time they came out the next time, the problem had got worse. What happened to them?
Okay.
So those mechanisms are there. We just have to enforce the little we have first before we add more. Otherwise, red tape will take over. Yeah.
So for example, Conrad, Ora is talking about state lands. Land.
Yeah.
An executive instrument right now, from the president can come out and say, henceforth, nobody, we don't care whether it's politically exposed person, we don't care whether it's a foreigner or not, should sell or buy state land. And after that, follow up with proper legislation so that we know that the state lands are secure. Because what's the point in even selling state land? The land is going to be there in perpetuity. So what is even the point in selling it?
My answer to you is this. You see, that was done. And in fact, the current law says when government takes land from the people and no longer needs it, you can't sell it. You give it back to the original owners. If I were the president, unfortunately, I am not, I would go beyond what you have said. Every single piece of state land since the Fourth Republic started, whether NDC or CPP or whoever, civil servants or judges, we fully audit them. At the time it was sold to you, was it at value? On what basis did you get that land? Should you have got that land? If we need to take it back, we'll take it back and give you the amount you paid. If we set the precedent for the next person we must be very radical about it. So that, look, all these lands in Achimota Forest and everything that have been sold out, if you are buying that land, you know you are committing an illegality because that land doesn't belong to government. When government doesn't need it, they should return it to the original owners, not sell it to you. So if you tomfoolery, look, most people buying them, why do they go and buy that land when there are other lands in the private sector?
So
normally, for example, the Achimota Forest, what they did was, that's why Ghana, you don't need these clauses. What they did was they first allowed the first owners, the traditional owners, to make the appeal, and I think they declassified, for want of a better word, some portion of the land and gave it out to these owners, and these owners quickly sold it to
individuals,
those politicians who wanted it. So it was kind of an agreement.
Yeah,
Agreement was that
yeah,
see,
but
why
I
can't the
think that,
government prosecute it?
yeah, all
You
right.
see, even
I
including the
think that we
decision
are.
to declassify.
I think that we are all on the same page, except that
Yeah.
I feel that our system doesn't have some internally built mechanisms that would trigger actions, right? It doesn't trigger corrective action
Yeah.
when some of these things are done. And
It
for
waits
me,
for somebody to come
yeah,
and do it.
if you want to solve a problem, do it in such a way that automatically, if there's an action that is contrary to what is the desired behavior, it should trigger an action,
Mark,
and
who
we
will be
can
the
do it.
trigger? Mark,
So
the
no.
people who should trigger are nose deep, neck deep.
Yeah,
In
but no,
fact,
but
head deep in the
yes,
thing.
but that's what I'm saying, that we have to really confront it on a serious level, whereby it might not necessarily, it might have to be decentralized in some shape or form. And for me, that's where I disagree with the general idea of copying and pasting external laws and assuming that these are laws that work elsewhere, and so we should have them, and we take them for granted that they are meant to solve certain problems, right? But for me, let's look within ourselves and say that, look, this is the way contractors behave. How do we prevent contractors from being able to take money from the awardee of a contract and then go back and give them a cut? We can look within ourselves and really find solutions to that kind of problem. And for me, I think oral, in addition to prosecuting past perpetrators of corrupt acts, should also try to seal the loopholes that made it possible for them to steal in the first place. And that way we will say that we are solving this problem. And when the government leaves office, we can conclusively say that they addressed this problem that has bedeviled us for decades.
Yeah, I think
Right.
that's
That's my own point.
Yeah.
But
I
I don't think
agree
there's a
with you,
Ghanaian
Mark.
who
You see,
disagrees that past corrupt officials shouldn't be brought before the law. I think we perfectly agree with that. But the approach is where I personally have a problem. I feel that let's see the problem that we are solving.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think I think so. In the spirit of like, how do we prevent the loot in the first place of happening? One of the things I also think we need to be happening is that we need principled politicians.
Yeah.
I say that in the sense that not always, you don't necessarily have to toe party lines all the time. So, for example, SML, right? How come nobody in the NPP spoke against SML? Because we all knew that SML was getting this money, not adding any value in the downstream petroleum sector, but was getting paid all this money to the extent that the finance minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, wanted to give them even more contract in the upstream, right? We can talk about so many examples where it's almost like everybody, because civil society will talk, but the government will always see them as like civil society is just aligning with the opposition, right? So within the party, like within the ruling party, how come we cannot have some kind of dissent happening? Because we see this and then they will later tell us, oh, they did not agree with the position, but you stayed on, right? Like you were a minister, like recently in a province here, like a minister resigned because they didn't agree with the province's procurement practices. They just resigned. That hardly happens in our jurisdiction, right? So these same people stay on. Like Baumia later came to tell us that he didn't agree with some of the things that was happening, but you stayed on, right? And so, and I think it's not an easy thing to do, of course. Like it's easier said than done, but I think we really need to get to that certain point where there will be internal dissent that's happening. Because, like, I made the example of the gold board, and I think that I'm very particular about that, because the Bank of Ghana has gold board is technically going to be doing gold trading, basically, and the gold for reserves and all of those stuff. Like the opportunity that's it. And you were talking about the losses that were made. The Ghanaian people don't even have an extent of like how much losses were actually made. Like you've said, 94 million here. We understand there's even more losses that happened, right? But here's the case: we haven't addressed any of that. We're going to do our own program, right? So who is speaking against that? Who is bringing that dissent? Who is bringing that? And it's not something that you're telling people in private, right? Maybe you say they don't listen, so maybe you come public with it, so that then people can be able to support that. But if we just stay on and continue with all these, then the rot is just going to continue. So I think in terms of checks and balances, that's one of the ways. Like we need the dissent happening within the parties themselves as well.
No,
Okay.
Alfred, I agree with you
Yeah.
100%. And I tell you, that is a conundrum that I personally have had. And look, my view is this.
Mhm.
Look at the makeup of our politicians. We need objective thinking people like two of you. Forget me, I'm NDC already. Not that to either pick a party and play an active role, or if you go civic, be part of a strong civic society. I will look forward to civic society holding the feet of the NDC to its oral promises and saying that 1 year, that gold ball, we saw as a loss. We will demonstrate until you investigate them. We will demonstrate until the NSA guys go in. Make the government unpopular if they cannot exact accountability. But you know what we do? If today you organize a demonstration for pay, public workers, TUC, they'll all be there. Organize a demonstration that we should go and retrieve the money from Gold Board or NSA or prosecute anybody. None of them will turn up. And these are the people that make the difference. After all, it is said that the price that the wise pay for not engaging in what? Politics is that they get to be ruled by what? The Greek called them idiots, but I would just use a better euphemism. Maybe Agana will help me. But we need to engage. I think Bryce Simon made the same point. But those of us here, look, you are an objective-minded data analyst.
Oreku is an MPP guy, but
fantastic.
Nana made him go into the closet.
No, but let me make the point here. These two fine gentlemen, if they walk into any party, they can speak their mind and walk out. So the price for speaking is very low. Picture me. I finished JSS. I didn't go far. Somebody now puts me in the government. That is my own source of daily bread. If my government is out, I'm in Sahara Desert. No kobo for me to chop. Self-interest will kick in.
So that was what I was going to say. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. In
the
UK and everywhere, for example, when you can criticize your government, especially the parliamentary system, but once you criticize, you are walking out. Like so it's the same as Ghana in one way or the other. I think when you criticize your government openly, you should be prepared to walk out. And that is what is happening in Alberta. But they are walking out because while they were in government, they were relying on only their salary, and they can make more money outside the government
of politics,
than
in government.
So but in our case, you make more money in government, so it's not sensible to criticize them and walk out. So you will stay, because when you go outside, you will not make money. So but
that's if you went into public service to make money. That's the first thing.
I'm talking about.
So you can walk in, my issue of mind and walk out.
Yeah, I just want to say this. My issue of corruption in our political party system actually starts from the political party financing. So, see, Akufo-Addo had an existential problem. He campaigned 3 elections, and one person in particular bankrolled him throughout the 3. And that person, I think the mistake he made was giving that person a finance ministerial portfolio. That was the biggest mistake. Mahama is a little bit smart, but Mahama will be confronted with the same issue, where he has gone for 2 elections. He has been financed most cases by his brother. Forget about the fact that he's his brother. He's a businessman. He will not look down and wait for his money that he invested to just go waste like that. So with time, you see some of these elements pushing you, the president, to make and do certain things, because those people invested in you to get their money back. Even if they are not going to make profit, they have to get their money back. And our political financing arrangement is so expensive, extremely expensive, that to get your money back, you have to do a lot of the things that Oforiatta was doing. And that is what is going to happen to Mahama if we are not really. So it's not him as a person, but the reality of our politics. So we have to look at the whole financing of
partisan politics,
and we have to do audit too. I think once they finish, like after election, compulsory, we have to audit all these political parties and know where all their money came from.
Went.
It's going to be hard to audit them because the money is in cash. So that it's hard.
It's a tall order, But again, with solutions to problems, we have to strive. You cannot sit and wait for the problems to solve themselves, right? You do a little bit, and then you seal it up little by little, and I mean, it's aspirational, so you can never get it done fully, right? But I like the way this conversation sort of devolved naturally into more of a discussion rather than a rigid white collar type of political talk show. But our time is up, and I appreciate you all coming.
But I'll pray for Conrad. I'll pray
Let's.
for you to get
please.
a position.
Oh, please don't pray that I shall be tempted. But one small thing.
No. To get a position and
Yeah.
go help shake the system a little bit.
Mhm.
You see, one ray of hope that I hold is this: in 2016, in the face of Ghanaians' view that the government then was not fit for purpose, was corrupt, they rejected it by 900,000 votes. In 2024, in the face of same, if not worse, a resounding almost double that, right? I pray, you see, in corruption studies, they will tell you that ultimately democracy, we know democracy doesn't cure corruption, but at least at the ballot box, it makes politicians begin to think. I do not want my NDC to go and suffer the $3.7 million, 3.7 million vote loss, or catastrophically 20%. So if anybody is trying to take the NDC down by stealing, I will go after them as an NDC man. I think the government, the people must carry on that way. If a government is corrupt, in fact, if it is possible to give them zero, give them zero, so that we all learn as political beings.
Yeah.
So I think there's that way of hope there. My only frustration is that we only do it every 8 years or every 4 years. We now need to be doing it every 6 months. We should get to a point where a government should resign in the face of gargantuan corruption.
Yeah.
We should be able to. And the whole country must go on the street and say, out you go. Not your 4 years. This one, we can't take it. Out you go. That is when we will know that we have taken corruption seriously.
Yeah. No, well, you're right. And for instance, in the United States, that's one of the reasons why their House elections are held every 2 years, because it serves as a check on, House members so that they don't become,
Maybe we should do that with Parliament.
Comfortable with their positions. I mean, I don't know. It's something that we have to really think about. But they did that for the purpose of
go on the Constitutional Review Committee and tell them to change the parliamentary election to be 2 years after presidential, so that the president's mind will always be on the next election. If you engage in any mess, you'll be out in 2 years. If not, you'll get opposition government.
I think 1992 we voted on different times.
We
voted on different times, so we can shift the voting to. So they will still go to 4 years, but we can shift the voting to
different times.
Plus the presidential term.
Yeah,
right.
And
that would be I don't know whether it will solve the problem or not. But
and then the other thing is I was going to say was that the party as a corporate body with a certain mindset is beginning to change, because I think, if you look at our political parties right now, there are the authorities within the political parties shift every now and then. And now I'm beginning to see a trend where some people are at the realm and they have an understanding that they are only there for a certain amount of time. And if they get the opportunity, they would loot as much as they can, because they know there's no guarantee the next time around. So that mindset that perhaps the party needs to conduct itself very well, otherwise it will be voted out of power, we may actually be losing it. Because I look around and I see that no, personalities are satisfying their individual interest. They lobby or they campaign to become party executives just to get that one chance where they can loot and leave, because they know it's not guaranteed. So the mindset of a party with a certain mindset as a corporate entity thinking about future election, we are losing it in our political dispensation as we speak today.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
Yeah,
but I agree with that. I think we are not, because if you look at some of the mistakes the MPP made, you were thinking, are they thinking about the elections?
No.
So, for example, 2 weeks or 1 month to the election, you have how do you call it? I think national service people. Some of them have their money; they are asking for it to be paid. You guys say you're not paying.
Yeah.
But you have monies for other things that you were doing, and I don't understand, why would you pay somebody who has worked and his money? So, like you said, those monies, I think some people were sitting on it to do knowing very well that even if Baumia is to win, they are out.
Yeah. People are sitting on campaign money, right? But
yeah,
anyway, that's a whole different subject matter. So hey, let's conclude today, and then we'll reconvene again. In fact, so Alfred, thanks a lot for the information that you you brought to our viewers this evening. Continue to do all that data gymnastics that you do. When you go to TV3, then you come here too and sort us out. Yeah, Oreku, you are my man. Anytime I call you, you for show up. You have no choice. And then Conrad, thanks a lot. So,
thank you,
and
guys.
to our viewers, thanks for
you,
joining
guys.
us every Saturday
Thank
to
you.
have a conversation about Ghana. And until next time, have a lovely weekend.
Bye.
All right, guys. Yeah.